She had always been curious about music. Ever since she could remember, the sounds of a piano had a strange effect on her. Whenever she heard the soft notes drifting from a nearby music hall or a friend's house, her heart seemed to beat a little faster. But she had never dared to try it herself. The piano, with its polished black and white keys, looked like a mystery she was too afraid to uncover. She always told herself she didn't have the skill, or maybe she would embarrass herself. And so, the piano remained just a beautiful object in her life, admired from a distance. One rainy afternoon, she found herself walking past a small music studio she had never noticed before. The window was slightly fogged, but through the glass, she could see the outline of a grand piano. Something inside her stirred. It was as if the piano was calling to her, urging her to come closer. She hesitated at the door, her hand hovering over the handle, unsure if she should step inside. But curiosity won. Slowly, she pushed the door open and entered the warm, quiet space. The smell of polished wood and old sheet music filled the room. It was peaceful, a calm she didn't often feel in her busy life. She approached the piano, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface, marveling at how it felt under her touch. The keys gleamed under the soft light, black and white in perfect contrast, waiting patiently. She had never imagined they could feel so inviting. She stood there for a few moments, just looking at them, imagining the sounds she had always heard from afar. Her heart raced as she finally sat on the bench. She stared at the keys, unsure where to place her fingers. Memories of music she had heard as a child floated in her mind. She remembered the gentle lullabies her mother hummed, the songs from the radio, and the tunes she had listened to at school concerts. But nothing in her memory could guide her now. She felt both excited and terrified. What if she touched the wrong key? What if she sounded foolish? With a deep breath, she lifted her hand and pressed a key. A clear, delicate note filled the room. She froze, startled by the sound she had just created. It was not the perfect melody she had imagined, but it was real. She had made it herself. Encouraged, she pressed another key, then another. Slowly, the notes began to form a small pattern, a rhythm that felt almost natural. It was clumsy at first, awkward even, but there was something magical about it. She was no longer just a listener. She was a creator. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes passed like hours as she explored the piano, experimenting with different keys, trying to mimic the melodies she remembered. She didn't notice the rain outside or the people passing by the studio window. The world narrowed down to the sound of the piano and the way it responded to her touch. Each note gave her a strange sense of joy, a connection to something bigger than herself. As she played, she noticed small details she had never seen before. The keys were not just black and white. They had their own texture, a subtle difference that made each one unique. The piano responded differently depending on how she pressed the keys. Light touches produced soft, delicate sounds, while stronger presses created louder, more commanding notes. It was as if the piano was alive, listening and responding to her every movement. She felt a bond forming, a silent communication between her and the instrument. Despite her excitement, doubt crept in. She wondered if she was doing it right, if she was making a fool of herself. But the piano did not judge. It simply allowed her to explore, to make mistakes, and to find her own way. She realized that music was not about perfection. It was about expression. Each note was a piece of her emotions, a way to tell a story without words. The thought filled her with courage, and she pressed on, experimenting with rhythms and combinations of keys, sometimes creating beautiful sounds, sometimes producing discordant clunks. Every attempt taught her something new. Hours seemed to pass, but she barely noticed. Her fingers began to move more confidently, finding patterns that felt right. She discovered that she could create short sequences that made sense, little fragments of melody that sounded surprisingly harmonious. It was thrilling, a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. She laughed softly to herself, amazed at how something so simple could bring such deep satisfaction. She had always thought music was something reserved for the talented, the trained, the professionals. Now she understood that talent could appear in the most unexpected ways, even in someone who had never touched an instrument before. The room grew darker as evening approached, but she did not want to stop. Each note she played felt like a conversation with the piano, a way to communicate feelings she had never been able to express with words. Memories of her childhood, her fears, her hopes, all seemed to pour into the music. She felt lighter, freer, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The piano had given her more than sound. It had given her a sense of liberation. Eventually, fatigue settled in, but she could not resist one last melody. She combined the sequences she had learned, pressing keys with a newfound confidence. The sound filled the room, resonating with an unexpected harmony. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let herself be carried by the music. She did not care about mistakes or judgment. The music was hers, and it was perfect in its own way. She realized that this experience was just the beginning, that the piano had opened a door to something extraordinary in her life. When she finally stood and stepped away from the piano, her hands tingled, her heart raced, and her mind was full of new possibilities. She looked back at the instrument, feeling a mix of gratitude and wonder. She had come into the room a stranger to the piano and left as someone who had discovered a hidden part of herself. It was a simple encounter, yet it felt monumental. The piano, silent now, seemed to smile back at her, as if acknowledging the connection they had made. As she walked home in the quiet evening, she could not stop thinking about what had happened. She knew she would return, that this was only the first step of a journey that could change her life. Music had always been around her, but now she was part of it. For the first time, she felt a sense of purpose and excitement she had never known before. The piano had awakened something inside her, and she could not wait to see where it would lead. The ordinary life she had known felt different, as if a new chapter had begun, one filled with discovery, passion, and the magic of music. The next day, she could hardly think of anything else but the piano. Every moment away from it felt empty, and the memory of the notes she had played haunted her in the best way possible. She kept replaying them in her mind, imagining different variations, little melodies she had never tried before. Something inside her had awakened, a spark she couldn't ignore. She had discovered a world she never knew she could enter, and it called to her relentlessly. That afternoon, she returned to the music studio. The door creaked slightly as she opened it, and the warm scent of polished wood greeted her again. The piano seemed to wait patiently, as if it had been expecting her. She sat down, hands hovering above the keys, and for a moment, she felt a strange nervousness. Yesterday had been magical, but today she wondered if she could live up to that first experience. What if it didn't feel the same? What if the music wouldn't come to her again? She shook off the doubt and pressed a key. The note rang out, crisp and bright, and a wave of relief washed over her. She played another, then another, slowly building small phrases of sound. This time, she felt a little braver, experimenting with longer sequences, letting her fingers move in ways she hadn't dared before. The piano responded beautifully, and she realized that she was beginning to understand it in a deeper way. The notes were no longer just sounds. They were an extension of her feelings, her thoughts, her very being. Hours passed quickly as she lost herself in the music. She made mistakes, of course, pressing wrong keys or letting rhythm stumble, but she began to understand that mistakes were part of learning. Each error was a lesson, showing her how to adjust her touch, how to move her hands more confidently. She noticed subtle differences in tone depending on how she pressed the keys, and she discovered that she could create soft whispers of sound as well as loud, commanding notes. Every new discovery thrilled her. The piano was no longer a stranger. It was becoming a companion, a friend, and she felt a growing trust in its presence. As the evening light began to fade, she tried something bold. She started to play a melody she had never heard anyone else play, one she created entirely from her own imagination. The sequence was simple at first, then more intricate, with highs and lows that seemed to dance together. The music flowed more naturally than ever before, and she felt a surge of pride and excitement. She had done something new, something entirely her own, and it was beautiful. For the first time, she truly felt like a musician, not just someone touching the keys for the first time. During a short break, she stepped back from the piano, hands resting on her lap, and reflected on what had happened. Yesterday she had discovered the piano. Today she was beginning to master it, at least in her own way. The idea that she had no formal training seemed less important now. She realized that passion and curiosity could sometimes surpass lessons or technique. Her connection to the instrument was real, and that mattered more than anything else. She decided to challenge herself further. Picking a simple melody she had heard on the radio, she tried to replicate it. Her fingers stumbled at first, but she persisted, adjusting her hand positions and refining her touch. Slowly, the notes began to align with the song, imperfect yet recognizable. She smiled, thrilled that she could recreate something she had only ever heard. It was a new type of accomplishment, one that gave her a sense of confidence she had never experienced. Music was no longer something to admire from a distance. It was something she could shape and express. While she played, she noticed small details she had never truly seen before. The way her fingers moved across the keys, the subtle resonance of each note, the tiny pauses that made a melody feel alive. Every aspect of playing became a discovery. She began experimenting with timing, pressing certain keys faster or slower, observing how the sound changed. She realized that music was not rigid. It was flexible, responsive, and deeply personal. Each attempt was a conversation between her and the piano, a dialogue she was beginning to understand. As evening turned to night, the studio was quiet except for the notes she created. Occasionally, she paused to rest her fingers and listen, letting the sound fill the space. The piano seemed to respond, holding its notes in the air, as if acknowledging her efforts. A sense of harmony settled over her, a feeling of being exactly where she was meant to be. She knew that what she was experiencing could not be measured by talent alone. It was about emotion, expression, and connection. Her imagination began to run wild. She thought about composing something that could be remembered, a melody that could tell a story without words. She tried combining the fragments she had discovered into a continuous piece, experimenting with rhythm and tone. Each small section was imperfect, but when put together, they created something that felt alive. She felt a rush of satisfaction and excitement, knowing that she had started to compose music from her own heart. During one of her breaks, she noticed a small group of children peeking through the studio window. They were curious, watching her play with wide eyes. She smiled and waved, feeling an unexpected connection. Music, she realized, was a bridge that could reach anyone. Even without speaking, she was communicating something powerful. The thought filled her with warmth, and she returned to the piano with renewed energy. As the night deepened, she grew tired but did not want to stop. She tried improvising, letting her fingers move freely, following instincts rather than memory. The sound became more fluid, unpredictable, and alive. She discovered melodies she had never planned, rhythms that surprised her, and harmonies that felt natural. In those moments, she felt truly free. The piano was not just an instrument anymore. It was a reflection of her soul. When she finally stood and stepped away, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Her fingers tingled, her mind buzzed with new ideas, and her heart was full of joy. She had returned to the piano not just to play, but to explore, to learn, and to discover a part of herself she had never known. The music had become a mirror, reflecting her thoughts, her emotions, and her potential. Walking home that night, she replayed the melodies in her mind. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration, as if she had traveled to another world and returned. She understood that this was just the beginning. There was so much more to learn, so many melodies to discover, and countless ways to express herself. The piano had opened a door, and she was ready to step through it again and again. It was no longer just a curiosity. It was a passion, a calling, and she knew that her journey with music had only just begun. Word of her talent spread faster than she could imagine. It started slowly, with friends and family sharing stories about her playing. Then, videos of her first attempts on the piano found their way online. People were amazed, calling it remarkable that someone with no training could create such heartfelt music. She never thought anyone would notice her. She had only wanted to explore, to feel the piano beneath her fingers. Suddenly, strangers were watching, commenting, and praising her talent. It was overwhelming but exciting. Curiosity turned into real attention. One afternoon, she arrived at the studio to find someone had left a note inviting her to play at a small local event. She felt nervous. Playing alone was one thing, but playing in front of an audience was another. Her hands shook slightly as she sat on the piano bench, staring at the familiar black and white keys. She remembered the first time she had touched them, how hesitant she had been, and smiled. The piano seemed just as patient now, waiting for her to speak through it again. Her first few notes trembled, but as she continued, confidence grew. She experimented with new melodies, letting her imagination guide her hands. The small audience watched in awe. Even without knowing her story, they could feel the sincerity in her music. Some leaned closer, others closed their eyes to soak in the sound. She played longer than she had intended, losing track of time. When she finally stopped, the room was silent for a moment, then filled with applause. The warmth of the response made her heart swell. She realized that music could connect people in ways words never could. As days passed, more people came to hear her play. Friends brought their friends, and soon she found herself playing for people she had never met before. The attention was both thrilling and intimidating. She worried about making mistakes, about not being as good as they expected. Yet each time she sat at the piano, those fears melted away. The music was hers, and it flowed naturally. She realized that what mattered was not perfection, but honesty in her expression. Every note carried a piece of her heart, and that was enough. Her practice changed too. She started paying closer attention to the nuances of each note, experimenting with timing and pressure. Soft, gentle sounds could create calm, while stronger keys could express passion or urgency. She began blending melodies together, creating short compositions from the fragments she had discovered. Each time she played, she found new possibilities. She was learning not only to play but to communicate, to tell stories without words, using the piano as her voice. One day, a local music teacher happened to hear her play and was impressed. He spoke about her potential and suggested that her talent deserved recognition beyond casual audiences. She felt nervous and unsure, but also excited. The idea of showing her music to people who had trained their whole lives seemed intimidating, yet she couldn't ignore the opportunity. It was a chance to see how far her talent could take her and to learn more about music from those who understood it deeply. With encouragement from the teacher, she agreed to perform at a local gathering of musicians. She spent days preparing, exploring different melodies, combining techniques she had discovered on her own, and refining her sequences. Each practice session was filled with experimentation. She allowed herself to make mistakes, understanding that each error was a step toward improvement. She began to feel a rhythm within herself, a natural flow of music that did not rely on external guidance, but on her own instincts and emotions. The day of the performance arrived. She entered the venue with a mixture of nerves and excitement. Famous local musicians were among the audience. She sat at the grand piano, her hands hovering above the keys. The room was silent, waiting. For a moment, she felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let her fingers find the keys naturally. The first notes trembled, but then, as she played on, her confidence returned. Each melody, each chord, flowed from her without hesitation. She was no longer just playing notes. She was telling a story, expressing emotions she had never been able to articulate before. The audience was captivated. Musicians leaned forward, watching closely, fascinated by her intuition and natural sense of rhythm. They whispered to each other, amazed at how someone with no formal training could produce such music. Her heart raced as she continued to play, but she focused on the connection with the piano, letting the music guide her. Time seemed to disappear. She was in the moment, fully immersed in the sound and the feeling of creating something beautiful. After she finished, the silence lingered for a few moments, as if everyone was holding their breath, absorbing the experience. Then, the room erupted in applause. People cheered, some with tears in their eyes, others simply amazed at the talent they had witnessed. She felt a mix of relief, joy, and disbelief. She had never imagined her music could touch so many hearts. The validation was overwhelming, yet humbling. She realized that the piano had given her more than the ability to play notes. It had given her the power to move people, to connect through emotion. In the following days, more invitations arrived. Local newspapers wrote small articles about her, and music enthusiasts encouraged her to share her talent with larger audiences. She remained grounded, remembering the first time she touched the keys and the excitement of discovering music on her own. Despite the growing attention, she continued to practice quietly, focusing on her connection with the piano. Fame was not her goal. The joy of discovery and expression was. She wanted to explore the depths of her music and share it authentically. Each new experience reinforced a sense of purpose. She began to understand that music was not just about talent or skill, but about passion, curiosity, and the courage to try. Her journey had started with a simple touch of the piano, and now it was expanding in ways she could never have predicted. Every performance, every note she played, strengthened her confidence and inspired her to push boundaries. She discovered that she could communicate complex emotions through sound, reaching people in ways words could not. Through all the attention and excitement, she remained humble. She knew that her journey was just beginning. There were endless melodies to explore, countless harmonies to create, and infinite stories to tell through music. Each day brought new challenges, new ideas, and new inspirations. The piano had become not just an instrument, but a guide, a companion, and a teacher. It had unlocked a part of her soul, allowing her to express herself in ways she had never imagined. As she left the venue that night, walking under the city lights, she felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything she had experienced before. The reactions of the audience, the encouragement of fellow musicians, and the excitement of discovering her own talent all combined to make her feel alive. She understood that her connection with music was a gift, one that she wanted to nurture and share. The journey from curiosity to recognition had been extraordinary, but she knew it was only a chapter in a much larger story. The piano, patient and welcoming, awaited her return, ready to reveal new secrets and possibilities with every touch. The news of her playing had traveled further than she could have imagined. One day, she received an invitation to play at a special music event, one where renowned pianists and artists from around the country would gather. She felt a mix of excitement and fear. These were people who had studied for years, who had dedicated their lives to music. And here she was, someone who had only recently touched a piano for the first time. The thought was intimidating yet thrilling. She realized that this was a chance not just to share her music, but to see how far her passion could reach. On the day of the event, she entered a large hall filled with instruments, stage lights, and a crowd buzzing with anticipation. The atmosphere was electric. She could see famous musicians practicing, discussing, and laughing together. Her hands felt clammy, and she took a deep breath to calm herself. Sitting at the grand piano on the stage, she looked at the keys, thinking back to her first tentative touch. She reminded herself that the piano had always been patient, welcoming, and responsive. That thought gave her a sense of courage. As the lights dimmed and the spotlight focused on her, she felt a quiet moment of nervousness. The audience was vast, filled with experts and enthusiasts alike. But she closed her eyes and let herself remember the first time she had pressed the keys, the thrill of discovering her own sound. Slowly, she let her fingers find the keys, gently at first, then with growing confidence. The notes filled the hall, pure and clear, echoing through the large space. At first, she played simple melodies, feeling the rhythm and flow. But as she continued, she began to experiment, letting her instincts guide her hands. Her music carried emotion, shifting from delicate, soft notes to strong, commanding chords. Each variation told a story, revealing her joy, wonder, and determination. She noticed the audience's reaction, musicians leaning forward, eyes wide, as if they could not believe the sounds coming from someone so new to the piano. The reactions encouraged her, and she played with even more expression. The room was captivated. Some whispered to their neighbors, pointing out how natural her rhythm was. Others closed their eyes, allowing the music to wash over them. She was no longer aware of the stage, the audience, or the famous artists watching her. She was entirely in the moment, letting her emotions flow freely into the piano. Every note was authentic, every chord a reflection of her heart. She felt a connection that she had never imagined possible, as if the piano had become an extension of herself. Time seemed to slow as she continued to play. She experimented with melodies she had created herself, blending sequences she had discovered in her practice with new improvisations. Her hands moved with a fluidity that surprised even her, finding patterns and harmonies that felt right instinctively. She realized that music was not about training or perfection alone, but about feeling, listening, and expressing. The piano was responding to her, guiding her, and she was learning from it every moment. As she reached the climax of her performance, the music became richer, more layered, and more expressive. The audience could feel the intensity, the emotion pouring through each note. Famous artists exchanged glances, some whispering, others nodding in admiration. They had expected a simple display of raw talent, but what they heard was beyond expectation. It was not only skill but emotion, creativity, and a deep connection to the instrument. She realized then that she was not just playing music. She was communicating, telling a story that transcended words. When the last note resonated through the hall, there was a moment of silence. The audience absorbed what they had just experienced, not wanting to break the spell. Then the applause began, first hesitant, then growing into a thunderous response. People stood, clapping, cheering, and some even wiping away tears. She felt overwhelmed but profoundly happy. Her journey from a hesitant beginner to this moment was beyond anything she had imagined. She had shared herself through the piano, and the response was a powerful acknowledgement of her expression. After the performance, several famous artists approached her. They spoke words of encouragement, praising not only her natural talent but the way she played with feeling. They asked questions, curious about how someone could create such music without formal training. She explained her journey simply, speaking about curiosity, practice, and the connection she felt with the piano. Their reactions were a mix of surprise, admiration, and encouragement. It was clear that they recognized something special in her approach, something beyond notes or technique, a gift of authenticity. Over the next few days, she reflected on the experience. Playing in front of experts had been terrifying, but it had also shown her the power of passion and self-expression. She realized that music was a language that anyone could learn to speak, not necessarily through training, but through exploration and connection. Her perspective had shifted. She understood that the piano had been more than an instrument. It had been a doorway to discovering her own voice and emotions. The encouragement from professionals made her feel validated. Yet she remained humble, knowing that the journey had just begun. She continued to practice, inspired to refine her abilities while staying true to the way she expressed herself naturally. The event had opened doors to new opportunities, but her focus remained on the music itself. She experimented with new melodies, discovered unique combinations of notes, and allowed herself to improvise more freely than ever before. Every session was a chance to grow, to explore, and to communicate feelings that words could not capture. With each passing day, she became more confident. The fear that had once accompanied her first touch of the piano was replaced with curiosity, excitement, and determination. She understood that mistakes were part of the process and that the beauty of music lay not in perfection but in expression. Her connection with the piano deepened, and she learned to trust her instincts. The instrument had become a partner, guiding her while allowing her to lead. The experience with the famous artists also taught her the value of sharing her journey. People were inspired by her story, someone with no training discovering a hidden talent and expressing it authentically. She realized that her story could encourage others to explore their own passions, even if they lacked formal guidance. It was not just about her playing the piano. It was about inspiring others to take that first step toward discovering something extraordinary within themselves. Reflecting on her journey, she felt a sense of gratitude. The piano had offered her more than music. It had given her confidence, a voice, and a new way to connect with the world. The support and admiration from experienced musicians validated her efforts, but more importantly, it reminded her of the power of curiosity and persistence. Every day she played, she discovered new possibilities, new melodies, and new ways to express herself. As she left the venue that day, the applause still echoing in her ears, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been extraordinary, and the recognition from experts reinforced her belief that passion and authenticity could shine brighter than technique alone. She knew that there was still much to learn, but the experience had strengthened her resolve. The piano had been her guide, and now she was ready to continue exploring, discovering, and sharing the music that had always been inside her, waiting to be heard. After the remarkable experience with the famous artists, her life began to shift in subtle but profound ways. The piano, which had once been a curiosity she approached with hesitation, had become the center of her daily life. Each morning, she woke up thinking of melodies, imagining the sounds she could create, and eagerly anticipated the moments she would spend with the instrument. Music had transformed from a passive interest into an essential part of her being, giving her a sense of purpose and direction she had never experienced before. She continued to practice diligently, not out of obligation, but out of a deep desire to explore every nuance of sound. She experimented with rhythms, dynamics, and expressions, discovering that the piano could convey emotions she could not put into words. Each day brought new surprises, a chord combination that felt unexpectedly beautiful, a melody that captured a fleeting emotion, or an improvisation that resonated deeply within her. The sense of discovery was exhilarating, and she found herself losing track of time whenever she played. Her story began to inspire others. Friends and acquaintances shared her journey with their networks, and soon, more people became aware of the young pianist who had touched a piano for the first time and left even experts speechless. Letters of encouragement and invitations to perform in small events and community gatherings began to arrive. She felt humbled by the recognition but remained focused on the joy of creating music. It was no longer about proving herself or gaining accolades. It was about sharing the beauty and emotion that had emerged from her connection with the piano. She also noticed the effect her music had on others. People who listened to her playing often paused to absorb the sounds, some closing their eyes, others nodding with appreciation. A few confessed that her melodies had touched them in ways words could not. Some said they felt calm, inspired, or even moved to tears. Witnessing these reactions reminded her of the power music held, the ability to connect people, transcend language, and evoke emotions. It was a profound realization, one that deepened her respect for the art and strengthened her commitment to explore it fully. As her confidence grew, she began to compose her own pieces. What had started as tentative exploration evolved into deliberate creation. She would sit at the piano for hours, experimenting with harmonies, rhythms, and melodies until she discovered sequences that felt complete. Each composition was a reflection of her experiences, her emotions, and her imagination. Some pieces were soft and reflective, while others were lively and energetic. Through these compositions, she could communicate her inner world, telling stories that only music could express. Her growth was not without challenges. There were times when she felt stuck, unsure how to make a melody flow, or how to convey a particular emotion through sound. She learned to be patient with herself, to embrace mistakes as opportunities for learning and growth. Every error revealed a new possibility, a new path to explore. She began to see that mastery was not about perfection but about understanding, expression, and the courage to take risks. The piano had taught her patience, persistence, and resilience, lessons that extended beyond music into her everyday life. Performing for audiences became more frequent. Small gatherings turned into larger events, and each time, she felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Yet, She discovered that the best performances were those where she allowed herself to be fully present, letting the music flow naturally rather than trying to control every note. The connection between her and the audience deepened as she embraced authenticity over perfection. People were drawn not only to the sounds she created but to the sincerity and passion behind them. Through these performances, she realized that her journey was about more than personal achievement. Her story became a source of inspiration for others who had hidden passions or unexplored talents. Friends, teachers, and even strangers would approach her to share how her music had motivated them to try something new, to take a first step toward a dream they had been hesitant to pursue. She felt a sense of responsibility to continue nurturing her gift, knowing that it could ignite hope and curiosity in others. Despite the growing attention, she remained grounded. She never forgot the first day she touched the piano, the uncertainty and hesitation she had felt. That memory reminded her that the journey itself was as important as the outcome. Each moment of discovery, each note played, each connection made through music was a victory in itself. She learned to savor the process, to cherish the act of creation, and to find joy in exploration. Over time, she developed her own style, influenced by the melodies she loved and the improvisations she had discovered through practice. Her music became recognizable, unique, and expressive. Audiences began to anticipate her performances, not just for the technical skill she displayed, but for the emotion and storytelling embedded in her music. Her ability to convey complex feelings through simple notes became her hallmark, and she realized that her journey had transformed her from a curious beginner into an artist who could touch hearts and inspire minds. She also began mentoring others, sharing her experience with people who were just starting to explore music. She encouraged them to embrace curiosity, to experiment, and to trust their instincts. Her story was proof that passion and determination could reveal hidden talents, regardless of training or experience. Watching others discover their abilities gave her immense satisfaction and reinforced her belief in the transformative power of music. Reflecting on her journey, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The piano had been more than an instrument. It had been a doorway to self-discovery, expression, and connection. It had allowed her to uncover a part of herself that she had never known existed and to share it with the world. The recognition from audiences and professionals was meaningful, but the true reward was the ongoing relationship she had developed with music, a relationship built on curiosity, passion, and authenticity. She realized that her story was not just about the piano or her talent, but about the courage to take the first step, to try something new, and to embrace the unknown. That single act of touching the piano had set off a chain of events that transformed her life. It reminded her that potential often lies hidden, waiting for curiosity and courage to awaken it. Her journey was a testament to the idea that even the smallest steps can lead to extraordinary discoveries. In her quiet moments, she would sit at the piano, reflecting on the path she had traveled. She would experiment with new melodies, improvise, and create compositions that captured her evolving emotions and experiences. The piano remained a faithful companion, patient and responsive, always ready to reveal something new. Her life, once ordinary, had been enriched with purpose, passion, and the ability to inspire others through music. As she looked toward the future, she knew that her journey was far from over. There were still countless melodies to discover, stories to tell, and connections to make. She felt a profound sense of excitement and possibility, knowing that the piano would continue to guide her, challenge her, and inspire her for years to come. The transformation she had experienced was not just about talent, fame, or recognition, but about finding her voice, embracing her potential, and sharing the gift of music with the world. Her journey had started with a single touch, a hesitant curiosity, and a spark of wonder. Now, she stood as a living example of how courage, passion, and dedication could unlock hidden potential. She had inspired audiences, touched hearts, and discovered a deep connection with herself through the piano. And though she had left even the most famous artists speechless, the most important transformation was within her. She had found her purpose, her voice, and her love for the music that would guide her for the rest of her life.